recently, and then it was actually Jeremy. Jeremy was in hospital. But here am I, being Grove of radio, instead, or Grove of Laurie Lee. Now, Laurie Lee, you all know about Laurie Lee.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what you know about Laurie Lee. You know that he was a boy, a rustic country boy from Slad in Gloucestershire, very poor, and grew up in this country childhood, and he then went off suddenly to Spain when he was 20 and busked his way around with a violin, and then he happened upon the Spanish Civil War. That is the Laurie Lee legend. And he spent the rest of his life, when he came home, he lived with his wife and daughter in Slad, in a cottage, and he spent the rest of his life writing about it, and the books he wrote, Aside with Rosie, he was 46 when he wrote Aside with Rosie about his childhood, all classics, these books. The next one was in 1969, and it was As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning, about walking through Spain, and everybody's always mangled that title, nobody gets it right. C.J. Lewis always called it As I Walked Out One Somerset Morn. And then finally, at the age of 78, he managed to produce the book about the Spanish Civil War called A Moment of War. Now, these 3 volumes took him to the age of 23, so there's an awful lot of life left. So when my agent and his, Pat Kavanagh, rang to say, why don't you do a biography of Laurie Lee? She said, he's very deaf, he's 82, and he's a bit tricky. He certainly was. That would have been. So I started to talk to him about it, and she said, I think you'll get on. Well, we did. We got on frightfully well on the phone, and then he died. Well, it's all right, because the best subject for a biography is a corpse. And everybody knew his story, but of course he left all the best bits out. You had to chercher les femmes in the case of Laurie, as is so often the circumstance of a biographer. He was so adorable as a young boy. He kept a diary at the age of 15. He was very musical, playing his violin. He wrote poetry, he painted and drew. He was good looking, a bit like Rupert Brooke, with a lot of hair falling over his forehead. And he always said that you had, in order to, he went away from Slad because he had to, because all the local girls were saying, marry me and settle down. And they were. There were the letters. Letters from a lovely pair of sisters called Betty and Molly, who implored him to marry them, one of them. Betty, who had a vision of the cottage they would live in and everything, how lovely it would be, and they would have a little baby boy called Keith. Everything was there. But he always said that the reason he lit out for Spain, why Spain, was that a girl in the village who came from Buenos Aires had taught him to say, un vaso de agua, por favor. Please may I have a glass of water. What a preposterous story. 1932, Slad, where 2,000 people lived at the most, nobody came from further afield than Cirencester. But what was amazing was that there was a letter among all these letters in his drawers. And the fact that he was dead meant that I could just go through his drawers. He never, ever would have said to me, oh, please just rummage away and, diaries, letters, notebooks, just use what you like. He never would have said that. He was the most secretive man, a person of concealment, he said. But anyway, there was this letter one day from a girl called Sufi, and at the end of the letter, una lección en español. And there it was, there were the phrases that he learned, and that's why he decided to go to Spain. And when he got to Spain, he played his fiddle, everybody adored him on sight. Musica, musica, they were shouting, playing for people, and he got by on charm. Charm, he was a very young, he wrote an essay about charm once. I've got a paragraph from it here. Charm, yes. Charm is the key to everything. Charm is the ultimate weapon, the supreme seduction, against which there are few defences. If you've got it, you need almost nothing else, neither money, looks, nor pedigree. It's a gift, only given to give away, and the more used, the more there is. I think that sums it up brilliantly. Anyway, that's what got him by. A bit like Patrick Leigh Fermor, as Jeremy agrees, I'm sure. Everywhere he went, he was welcome to people. And he met people. He had luck. The charm brings luck. And he was playing his fiddle in Toledo in the Great Square one night, sawing away, and suddenly a beautiful lady came over and asked him to join their table, and she asked him in French if he was German, and he replied in Spanish that he was English. And she was Mary Campbell, the wife of Roy Campbell, the poet. It was the first poet he'd met, and they took him in, and so he lived the life of this great big fellow, adventurous chap, Roy Campbell was. And so that was the first woman he met. Then the next woman he met was an amazing blue-stocking Somerville College lady called Wilma Gregory. And he met her in the south when he got to a little fishing village in Almunyca on the Andalusian coast. And Wilma was so well connected and literary and left-wing. She was the one who got the Foreign Office to send a battleship to take her away. Her family arranged it when the Spanish Civil War broke out. And what you hear from Laurie's book is that he was rescued by the battleship. He was accompanied by an English writer, he said. Nothing more. He never acknowledged these people at all. And what Wilma did also was to introduce Laurie, send him to Gunwallow in Cornwall once they got back to England. She sent him to art school because she thought he was such a gifted person in art. She sent his poems to T.S. Eliot at Faber. These women did everything for Laurie. He's that sort of boy. And then when he was 23, he was playing his violin on the beach at Gunwallow in Cornwall when there he spied Lorna, the love of his life. And it's very hard to know how to describe Lorna. Nobody would invent a woman like her now. It's unbelievable. A piece of work, we would call her. But she was staggeringly beautiful with enormous blue eyes. And she asked him to come and play for her. She did. And she decided at once that he was going to be her new man. She was brazen. She was like Zuleika Dobson, Becky Sharp. She was Anna Karenina, Madame Bovary, all rolled up into one absolutely maddening creature. And she was amazing. You see, there's a photograph in my book. And she bore his love child. She left her husband, who was a rich communist called Ernest Wishart. And she left her 2 little boys and had a baby with a love child with Laurie called Yasmin. For Lorna, he walked across the Pyrenees, again in 1937, back to the Spanish Civil War and enlisted with the International Brigade. That did happen. It's in the files in Moscow. So he did join the International Brigaders, but he didn't stay there long, the truth is. I mean, he wrote lovely poems about the flavour of the terrible winter of the Battle of Teruel, which was all absolutely true, and he was designated a good comrade by the International Brigade. But he was only there for 9 weeks, which you would never know from his book, The Moment of War. None of the adventures that he describes there actually took place. I'm sure of that, pretty sure of that. But he was there for 9 weeks. He took in all the flavour of it, spent the rest of his life agonising over whether to write about it, and eventually did. But he was having epileptic fits. He was an epileptic. He was always very secret. That was part of his secrecy. He couldn't bear to let anybody know about that. And he had these fits when he was there, so he was sent home. He was sent home in February 1938, and then, of course, Yasmin was born. And he set himself up in a caravan at the gate to Lorna's grand house in Sussex. So she went back to her husband. Husband brought up the little girl as his own, as people did, quite a lot. And Lorna would hare down the alleyway from the house to his caravan in her Daimler. every day, wearing fabulous clothes and bringing fabulous gifts. She was just unstoppable. She was fearless. Everybody said this. Everybody in Lorna's family said she was absolutely fearless. She was, of course, the sister. I mentioned the fact that she was the sister of Mary Campbell. I mean, he'd met Mary Campbell the year before in Toledo. It's a Dickensian coincidence, but there you are. That's what happened. And she was absolutely the love of his life. And when, after about 8 years together, she left him, it was heartbreaking. And who did she leave him for? She left him for what he called that dark, sinister youth. Lucien Freud was then 22. He just arrived from Berlin. He was already an enfant terrible of the art world. And she became his muse, as she'd been Laurie's. Laurie had written all his poems about her, the ones that were published then in Horizon. She'd introduced him to Spender and Connolly and got him published. And now Lucien painted her, and his first portraits in the Tate are of Lorna. So that, there you are, is the story. There is a bizarre coda to this story. Apart from the love triangle, L, L, and L, Laurie, when he was heartbroken, went in search of one of Lorna's nieces. There were 3 of them living in the King's Road with another sister of Lorna's called Kathleen, who was mistress to Jacob Epstein. There were 3 girls, and he took them out in turn. Esther, Kitty, and finally Kathy. He deflowered Kitty. He then took out Kathy, who was 14 and in her school uniform when he took her out. And as soon as she was 18, he married her in 1950. And in the same year, Lucien, who'd also been ditched by Lorna Wishart, he also went in search of one of her nieces. He married Kitty Epstein, who was the mother of his first 2 children. Absolutely extraordinary story. It just shows you that actually biography can be very much stranger than fiction, and that is the real story. I will say finally that there's another film of Cider with Rosie being made at this moment in Slab, and I bet you there is a girl, a young actress, who will become celebrated as playing Rosie. But as Laurie always said, there wasn't just one Rosie. She could have been any of the girls he'd met in the village. She could have been Cider with Edna, could have been Cider with Betty, but he was right to choose Rosie. He had a cousin called Rosie Green, and that has the right lapidary ring about it. And when Laurie died, there was a memorial meeting in Stroud, and it was announced that, hooray, the real Rosie was present, and she would now stand up. And there was a slight pause, and then 4 old ladies, aged